Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Heretic 2 for PC, Mac, Linux, and Amiga OS. This is the sequel to the original Heretic, which was released in 1994 and was a first-person shooter by Raven Software that was set in a fantasy world, where you were using, instead of guns, stuff like magic crossbows and the Dragon Claw, which shot energy bolts and stuff like that. Very atypical for a first-person shooter, and that gave it a lot of charm, and I quite liked that game a lot. So the sequel had quite a few expectations going into it. First off, they made two other spin-offs, which were Hexen and Hexen 2. And these were both first-person shooters as well. They had a different spin on things, but they were pretty comparable to the original Heretic, with Hexen 2, of course, just being a graphical upgrade. Heretic 2, on the other hand, was very, very different. Instead of a first-person shooter or even a third-person shooter, it's a third-person action-adventure, which is just a weird direction to go in, but to be honest with you, it's kind of a good direction to go in because it's different. It's not sticking to the same formula. The question is, did they pull it off in such a way that this new direction for the franchise didn't just butcher everything? Or did they just completely screw everything up and end up having a game that not only was not true to the original, but just ended up being crap? In terms of presentation, it was both a step up and a step back for this game. And that was because, at the time, it was a step up. It was the Quake 2 engine. It looked way better than anything we'd ever seen at that time. And then again, it's the Quake 2 engine, which, by today's standards, looks absolutely terrible. Especially if you're running in an OpenGL mode, where all the textures look like they were just smeared together in just an oil painting mess. Like somebody just took a rag, dipped it in oil paint, and just smeared it on a canvas. That's what the textures look like in OpenGL mode. It looks terrible. And in addition, the lighting is completely broken in OpenGL mode as well, so you just can't see what you're doing. It makes it really hard to actually play this game in OpenGL. Problem is, you kind of have to play it in OpenGL just because it doesn't really work all that well on modern systems unless you're running it in OpenGL. I don't know why. It just does. But if you're playing it on software mode, the textures are surprisingly well detailed. They put a lot of stuff in them. Granted, they're rather pixelated, but there's a surprising amount of detail packed into these things, including like little details in the environments, and they packed the environments with tons of detail in this game, for the time anyway. And it's just pretty impressive how they've managed to create a nice visual atmosphere to this game. In addition, the sound helps that, because they have music now that's much more in your face than the original game. It was very, very subtle in the original. In this one, it just comes in, it's this atmospheric music that's really designed to just get you in the mood of the level. And you can actually turn that down if you want, because it starts out being extremely loud. In fact, I recommend turning it down, just because it'll just blast your eardrums out. But it's a nice change from the original. Another nice change is that they added in voice acting. Now, the voice acting in this game surprisingly doesn't suck. Now, it's not very good either. It's that early era of voice acting where it's just they did their job and that was kind of all they needed to do. There's nothing that will particularly impress you, nor is it anything that'll make your ears bleed. But it's there, and it's appreciated, because it actually lends some character things now. Like, for instance, you're no longer just this guy running around blasting demons and such. You're now actually Corvus, which, that was who you played in the original game, sure. But he has a voice now. He has a face. You can actually see him. So, he actually has a little bit more personality in this one. Not much, granted, but it's a little bit more. It's got more character development in that regard. You'll actually encounter people that you will talk to, as opposed to just whack in the face. So it's got a nice refreshing change due to some of these changes in the presentation. And the sound effects themselves, they're up to the same quality as the original. I mean, the original had this nice fantasy element to it that just sounded just right. And this one is no exception. It has that fantasy element to it, and it just sounds just right. It's nothing that'll blow you away for the most part, but it's still there, and it's all very good. But what really matter are the story and the gameplay, and the story in this one takes place after the events of the original Heretic. Corvus has returned home to find that the land of Parthoris is completely wrecked by this weird plague that just suddenly came out of nowhere. If it doesn't kill you, it turns you insane, and he finds this out the hard way, because when he gets home, there's nobody there. And so he's in his hometown. He's like, wait, where is everybody? So as he explores, he finds out, oh wait, they're crazy and they're attacking me on sight because they have this plague. And so Corvus has to go find a cure to the plague and make sure he doesn't succumb to it himself, because, well, it's a plague. It's wrecking the land. Of course, it's going to affect him eventually. And they make the attempt to explain that he's slightly immune to the plague. He's not immune to it, but he's resistant to it because he has one of the tomes of power. So that they try to fill in a plot hole there, but anyway. But the whole story gets more complex than just him trying to find a cure to this plague, and it's okay. It's not particularly impressive by any stretch of the imagination, but it does hold the game together, and they only intersperse the story bits when it doesn't really interrupt the gameplay all that much. It's usually towards the beginning or towards the end of a level, and in between you have a lot of gameplay, so there's mostly gameplay in this rather than just cutscenes, and the cutscenes don't really last very long, so that's pretty nice. As far as the gameplay goes, well, it's completely different from the original game. Heretic 1 was a first-person shooter that was basically Doom Fantasy Edition. Heretic 2 is a third-person action-adventure. Yeah, pretty big change there. And it's weird, too, because it feels like they tried to make it a fast-paced first-person shooter at first, just from the way the combat feels. And then somewhere along the development, they said, okay, screw it, we're going third-person and making it an action-adventure with some platforming stuff going on. And somehow, despite feeling like it has mixed priorities, it works out. I mean, the platforming itself, the movement system in general, feels smooth. I mean, you feel like you have some weight to you when you're moving around. You can pole vault when you have your blade staff out, so that makes you jump much further than you normally would from just plain jumping. You can roll around, you can dodge and all that sort of thing. You're pretty agile. And, of course, you move really fast, too. That's where the fast-paced first-person shooter thing comes in. The combat in this game is really fast-paced, but the AI is completely stupid. I mean, they basically charge directly at you while you're flinging fireballs and hellstaff bolts and such at them. So that's pretty weird. But the combat itself, it's really fast-paced, but none of the weapons are hit scan except for, of course, the blade staff, because that's a melee weapon. But you have to get really used to how everything flings around. Like when you throw a fireball, it takes a little while to hit the target, so you have to lead your targets and such when they're moving or when you're moving, and it makes the combat feel much more dynamic than it did in the original game, which is weird. It also makes it a lot harder to actually hit things because now it's in 3D and you have to aim, and you do get a crosshair, but sometimes it's a little bit of a pain to actually see where the crosshair is. You'll know what I mean when you're watching this video. You also see how fast-paced everything is, and it makes it kind of hard to keep up with things until you get used to it. So it's got this weird feel to it. It's like it's somewhere between a first-person shooter and an action-adventure game. Because, I mean, it has puzzles, and they're pretty simple, I mean, brain-dead kind of things. So they never really hinder you, but at the same time, it feels like it's got remnants of that first-person shooter heritage, where you get stuff like secret areas. You get stuff like brain-dead enemies charging directly at you while you annihilate them with tons of cool weapons like the Hellstaff, like the Phoenix Bow and the Storm Bow, and of course various spells that you'll blast them with. And you also get defensive, offensive spells, and then of course the weapons. You start with the Blade Staff and the Fireball spell. You get more as you go through the game. And each of them has their own effects. And you feel like you're really powerful fighting a lot of these enemies. And then you come along to a boss, and suddenly you don't feel so powerful anymore, and you actually kind of struggle to take down the boss. So it's got this nice difficulty curve to it, where the first few levels are really easy. And they serve as getting you used to how the game feels, how you move, how you attack things and such like that. And then it ramps up the difficulty a little bit, and they increase the difficulty, the platforming, which it feels fine in this game, so that's not that big of a deal. But it's just something you have to get used to. They ramp up the difficulty of platforming. They make the enemies tougher. They give you flying enemies that you have to defeat instead of just rats and plague-infested people. And the game gets harder as you go through it, and gets more complex. I mean, you'll eventually be wanting shrines around so you can go to them and get your armor that will drastically reduce the damage you take. You'll want to go there and find that you don't have any mana anymore, and you're like, I need mana. Oh, look, there's a shrine that gives me mana. Thank you, game! And so, it's got a lot to it, and it feels really nice as far as gameplay goes, so it's weird. I mean, I really like the original Heretic, and it was a great first-person shooter in the style of Doom. And this, even though it has very little to do with the original game gameplay-wise, it's a good sequel. I can do nothing but recommend it. The problem is, it's kind of hard to find these days. I don't know anywhere where you can get it online anymore, unfortunately, so that's kind of an issue, but if anything ever comes up, I will put a link in the video description box, but for now, you kind of have to find it in a bargain bin or something. So, I highly recommend this game. I mean, it is a very fun game to play. It's just don't go into it expecting the exact same thing from Heretic that you did from, say, Hexen 2, where it was almost exactly the same kind of thing as the original game. This is a very different style, and it works very, very well. Thanks for watching.